Way back in episode 25 of this podcast, I talked about social media's increasing use of science to sell you products. I tried to make clear that I wasn't dunking on any of the Instagrams or YouTube channels that I discussed. Instead, I focused on the following points. Using science as a differentiator doesn't always make what's being discussed better or carry more weight. More and more, science and science communicators are being placed on pedestals, and we see science successfully used in marketing and propaganda, and because apparently, just like sex, science sells. Like I said, I wasn't trying to dunk on anyone. It was more a piece of advice to keep an eyebrow raised when watching any video with science in the title. And perhaps it was an expression of disappointment that science was being used so cheaply. Now, using science and scientific authority to sell products is nothing new. I mean, the Trident gum introduced its famous 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed would recommend sugarless gum to their patients who chew gum campaign 50 years ago. And I also inferred a bit of tongue in cheek in that statement. Yes, they were implying medical authority in their statement, but it seemed like a meme before memes were a thing. At least that's how I first heard it, 15 years into the campaign. But maybe it was taken more seriously in the very beginning. But today it's just gotten out of hand, and I really blame our COVID response. Science became a capitalized word, an entity unto its own, an entity with unquestionable authority. I'll save the rest of that specific commentary for another episode, but for this one, the important observation is that science with a capital S found its way into many YouTube communities, including the YouTube fitness community. And creators used it to great effect for several years, but now rebellion is in the air, and its dissenters are just as ludicrous as the capital S science peddlers to begin with. Over the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of science based fitness channels have risen to the top of the YouTube fitness community. It started as debunking of ineffective and, quite frankly, stupid fads in dieting and exercise, the proverbial snake oils, if you will. And then the debunking kind of birthed its own trend, one called science based lifting. Its premise was simple. Through study of human biomechanics, we can determine the most efficient way to increase our muscle mass. And from a position of pure logic and theory, there should be an optimal combination of heavy or light weights, high or low rep volume, or easy or hard training intensity that gives you the most efficient outcome. Studies were conducted, training programs were crafted based on those results, countless videos were created to sell those training programs, and more than a few people made a lot of money and are making a lot of money from science based lifting. Exercise scientists openly position themselves not just as an alternative, but the better alternative to what they would call bro lifting. And what happens when one sect feels slighted by another sect? Yep, you get YouTube drama. Now, YouTube communities are no strangers to drama. In fact, the algorithm feeds off it. But drama in this lifting community is different because the science involved has morphed into capital S science. You see, the science based lifting team forgot to stay humble. They flaunted degrees and complicated sounding data. They cited journals and conducted their own studies. They started speaking in absolutes instead of in theories. Basically, they started acting smarter than they were. And then the bro lifters slapped back. One PhD bro lifter disemboweled the PhD dissertation of the leading science based lifter. He pointed out glaring clerical errors and stupefying statistical errors. He demonstrated a lack of innovation in the conclusion, which, in his mind, invalidated the awarding of the degree in the first place. And thus, the figurehead science based lifter was a fraud. And if he was a fraud, the entire field of study was fraudulent. So, sensing blood in the water, the other bro lifters pounced. Dozens of videos were produced proclaiming vindication. Confirmation bias overflowed in the comments section. And you know what resulted from this? Absolutely nothing. Yeah, a lot of creators made a lot of money through increased views and potentially sold more of their own brand of snake oil, but why didn't these science based lifters go out of business? Because it's all one giant echo chamber. True believers aren't going to change their minds, and everyone else just likes to watch the drama. And most importantly, there's no such thing as bad publicity. But let's discuss what role science actually played in this drama, and maybe more importantly, if this drama has any impact on the perception of science. So, is science based lifting or science based fitness in general a valid field of study, or is it just hype? Now, studying the human body's biomechanics is most certainly valid. And so is studying our metabolic processes, such as energy consumption and how nutrients in our food are used. It's also valid to study how muscle tissue is grown or how weight bearing exercises affect bone density, for example. Designing studies and publishing data on those and other topics is valid science. And we should continue funding and studying that science. But when you change the question from how does the human body build muscle to how should you lift in order to optimally build muscle, you've changed from science to engineering, and that distinction matters. Engineering applies science to develop a solution that meets a set of requirements. And the part about requirements is where the science based lifters have failed because they're not defining the conditions under which the subject will be building muscle. For example, if I have 300 minutes a week to dedicate to weight training, is my optimal program different than someone who only has 180 minutes? It probably is different. They also use benchmarks that are ambiguous at best and undefinable at worst. One of the cornerstones of the science based lifting approach is leaving reps in reserve. This means you stop your set before reaching failure of the muscle, which itself also has an ambiguous definition. How can you design an optimal program for someone when you can't even explain what a rep in reserve means in quantifiable and repeatable terms? Science based lifting is used as a buzzword to sell videos and programs and clout, but that doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about. They pass along good knowledge, but it needs to be applied critically depending on the individual conditions. It also doesn't mean the bro lifters are off the hook in this. Their egos are just as inflated, and saying an entire field of study is invalidated because of a shoddy PhD dissertation and a few ill-designed studies is immature and intellectually wrong. And what's wrong with trying to be efficient in the gym in the first place? Most of us have limited time in our schedule, and we don't all get off on working out. As I said earlier, in a logical sense, there should be an optimal program for building muscle in the most efficient manner possible. But that program is not one size fits all, nor will it ever be one size fits all. It's going to vary person to person and will probably vary day to day for an individual person, depending on parameters like that person's overall level of rest that day, or the blood sugar when he goes to the gym, or even their emotional state. If taking a methodical approach works for you and it's an approach you can sustain over the long term, that's awesome. If you just want to hit the gym with a balls out, ire clanking approach because it's fun and you can sustain that over the long term, well, that's wonderful too. Thank you for listening to this episode of the STEM Sessions Podcast, a podcast researched, written, and produced by Cody Colborn. This episode's music is titled Gearhead and was composed by Kevin MacLeod and can be found at incompetech.com. The show notes and transcript can be found at thestemsessions.com, which is also the best place to provide feedback, corrections, and value for value support. Remember, doing your own critical research will always be to your benefit, and any pundit or scientist that tells you, hey, just trust me, bro, or scolds you for fact-checking and questioning isn't offering true education. So until the next one, keep learning,